I'm delighted to introduce today Luke Bowler. He is the head of client service at Therefore Interactive, an award-winning digital agency in Toronto, Canada. Now, Luke has over a decade of experience working in the creative industry, and I've invited him to share his perspective on the role of client services director and any tips for those in account management who aspire to be head of client service. Luke, a very warm welcome.
Thank you. I'm honoured, Jenny. I've listened to your podcast for a long time, and probably started listening to it at a time when I really needed some structure and some organisation around what it means to be an account management, and especially what it means to be a client service director. So thank you. I really am honoured to join you.
I'm delighted to hear that. And it's a pleasure to finally talk to you after so long, sort of having interactions with you on LinkedIn. So just start off, Luke, by telling us a bit about you. How did you get the role of CSD? Tell us a quick kind of summary of your background.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny, I was reflecting on this the other day, and on paper, I don't think it could be an any more linear journey to the creative industry, certainly. But it's not felt, I don't think it could have felt any more chaotic. It's gone through many twists and turns. I think my journey started very young. I had a cousin who was called Stuart, who was in the creative industry already, and at that time he was working for an agency, and then he became an agency owner later on. And he would buy me like a graphic design book every birthday, and that probably started me on my journey. And as I became more aware of what he did, his agency was producing D&AD award-winning work, and so he became a real inspiration for me in getting started. And that led me into college, where he went to the Surrey Institute of Art and Design at Farnham. I went to the one at Epsom, and I met two people there that I think kind of steered my journey, probably. One was a guy called Darren Franks, who he remains probably one of the most creative people I've ever met. So good at what he does. He was working for an agency called Studio Liquid at that point, which is in Guildford. Kind of the seed of that became Collider, which is a kind of experiential design agency. And he was doing some really cool like F1 concept work. And he also drove a Lotus Elise, which I really loved at that point. So I was like, can I get an internship? And if I travel on the train to your house every morning, can you drive me into the office? And he said yes. So I got up every morning, I got on the train, I went to his house, we had the roof down, and we drove into the agency, and I felt so cool. And that was just a really great experience. And I tried to, any summer really that I could, I would go and do an internship, just something to learn more about the industry. And then in college, I met a guy called Jamie Gregory, who's now head of design at Scholastic. Amazing illustrator, like really, really good. And for some reason, we hit it off. He was way better than I was, but we kind of got on personally. And as college kind of neared an end, and everyone was deciding what university they wanted to go to, he said, and this may be a myth or it may be reality, I don't know. I certainly believed it at the time, that if you wanted to go to Central St Martin's, you had to put them down as your one and only choice. And if you had any backups, then you wouldn't get in. And so that just inspired me. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And my parents were like, no, don't do that. Have a second option. And I didn't listen, and I just put CSM down as my one and only choice, and submit my application. And then the day before my interview for CSM, I was traveling home because I've been to college. I put all of my portfolio together in the kind of big black binder, and I left it on the train. And I rushed off to the person in reception. I said, "You've got to stop the train at the next possible moment, please." They did that, and it was gone. It wasn't there. And so overnight, I spent literally that night trying to piece together as much as I could, feeling like a total idiot going to this interview with like the thinnest portfolio ever. And I sat in the room in front of like 4 or 5 people and just had to explain why I loved the creative industry. And obviously told the story of what happened to my portfolio as well. And then I left thinking, well, there's no way I got that. So I should probably think about a different career because I'm not going to get in. And to my surprise, I got in, I got accepted. And I met up with one of the guys who was in the room, a guy called Gary Wallace, who's an amazing photographer, awesome photographer. And he said, it was a crazy story that you told, and I can't believe that you tried to put everything together in a night. But your passion for the creative industry really came across. And he was like, everyone else said no, but I said yes. And I want you to remember that and really take that to heart as you go through university. So all of that to say, the idea of being an account manager was not on my radar whatsoever. I didn't know what account management was. I saw myself as the designer in a design agency or the developer in a digital agency. I did not think about account management. But I guess when I look back now, books that my cousin bought me that I got really interested in, they were the ones about running an agency or managing a client. Think about ones like How to Be a Designer Without Losing Your Soul. It wasn't really about being a designer, so much about being a good client and being a good agency owner and setting up the right environment. And likewise, even that experience of going into the room and having to kind of sell myself and my abilities and my passion with really not a lot to show for it, kind of proved to me, I guess you've got some sort of skill for selling, so maybe you can, probably do all right in account management. So I would definitely say I fell into it, but most of the account managers I've met, they say the same thing.
I agree. And it's interesting that you say that you came from the creative route. So you were creative, you thought you were going to be a designer, but you're interested in the business side of the agency. So I think I'm going to ask you a bit of an possibly inappropriate question. Do you want to be an agency owner at some point?
Yeah, I think it's definitely always been an interest. And I think one of the benefits of now being a client service director is you are exposed to everything. I've read Robert Solomon's book, The Art of Client Service, where he talks about being second best at everything. And that so resonates with me. And I think the recent interview that you did touched on this as well, that, almost reframing what it means to be an account manager is to be a practitioner, and you end up knowing a little bit of everything. And I think when you then go through the ranks and you get to that kind of client service director role, now you really are seeing behind the curtain, and you're seeing all of the inner workings of an agency and what makes it work, and more importantly, maybe what makes it not work and not be profitable. So yeah, it's still an ambition for sure. I've probably got more organisation to to develop first, but no, for sure, it's always been a lifelong dream. Yeah.
I think it's the perfect pathway into agency ownership. I really do. And maybe there's some people listening to this that are already in a client services director role. Maybe they've considered it, maybe they haven't, but it's always inspiring to hear someone else's story. And I noticed that you've got a pink book on the shelf behind you. And do you want to read out which book that is?
Yeah, so this is the Grow Your Agency to the First £5 million and Beyond. I've got to convert that to dollars now. But £5 million and Beyond by Agencynomics. And this has been a great sort of framework, really, to look at and to benchmark against. It was very useful in my previous agency, totally different environment and different stage of growth to where the agency therefore is. But it's really nice to have something to look at and say, well, that's what good looks like. How close am I to that? That's very helpful.
Great. That's a great plug for the Agencynomics group as well. So we'll put a link in the show notes for anyone that wants to read that book, because it is really, really good. Just Luke, in terms of the agency you're at now, what's your kind of business setup? Tell me about the model. What kind of clients do you serve? And, do you split the AM and the PM team? Tell me a bit about the inner workings of the agency.
Sure, yeah. So I guess in terms of who we serve, we are, we're in the business of digital experience and kind of enterprise digital experience. We are typically working with the VP of marketing or the VP of technology or both. And I guess the common pain point that they tend to share is that in the past, getting teams to create content was like blood out of a stone. That's very much not the case anymore. And now the issue is more curatorial. Now there's so much content that it's enormously difficult to manage at scale when we're talking about lots of internal teams, lots of local markets, lots of languages, lots of currencies, etc. And they will generally tell us that the tools that they're using are really letting them down. Quite commonly, they've been sold a bit of a dream by the kind of DXP, digital experience platform vendors, that doing all of that in one place kind of can solve all of your problems. And I think the reality quite often is because those platforms have grown out of merger and acquisition, they're a bit of a Frankenstein. And so, what was a very small box of a kind of a single website becomes a much bigger box, but it's still a box at the end of the day. And our clients are trying to kind of break out of that. And so that's really where we help them. We architect a solution that can scale and that can help them to kind of keep on top of the content that's been created in the company. In terms of how we're set up, it's this is one of the things I think that drew me to Therefore. I think there's lots of different personas almost of client service people. I was always quite operational. I think I reached a point where, because at my previous agency, account management and project management were tightly coupled together, I was doing a lot of project management and not really feeling like I knew what to do, especially the bigger the project, the bigger the company, the higher the stakes. I felt quite, definitely a sense of imposter syndrome, and I need to go and train in this. I need to have some basis to lean on. So I went away and I did an agile course, and that was enormously helpful. It gave me lots of stakeholder management tips and just general kind of project management framework to work with. And so that just naturally turned my focus. I was already passionate about creativity. I was already somewhat strategic because I'd freelanced in the past, so I kind of had to be to generate business. I didn't have that kind of operational, organizational framework to fall back on. So that it gave me that, and it probably made me a little bit more, I had an eye for what was going on operationally. And so when I started speaking to Therefore, I was really impressed with how they were set up. They do separate between account management and project management. So account management actually at the moment is just myself, and it's entirely non-billable. And it's all about just generating new business in part, but also continuing to retain and grow existing client revenue. And then we have a completely separate project management function, which I'm so grateful for, because despite some training, they're a lot better at it than I ever will be. And we also have what we call Therefore Care, which is kind of everything that happens, after a project is delivered. And that, I would say, really is the business. And that's probably true of a lot of agencies. Obviously, most agencies want to have that recurring revenue, something that's predictable. And for that reason, Therefore Care sits almost as a business within the business. It's got its own P&L, it's got its own ring-fenced resource pool. So, when clients invest in an ongoing program, inevitably they want to know that their resource is their resource, and the next big project's not going to come along and everyone's going to move like iron filings to that project, and they're going to be left at risk. So having that separation between not just account management and project management, but also within that, I suppose, a bit of a pod-like structure, really, where this group of people are being managed independently, really takes a lot of the risk out of being an account manager, and everything becomes that much more predictable, I suppose. So definitely one of the things that draw me to Therefore.
Very interesting. So can you give us kind of a bit more detail about this Therefore Care? Like what actually, if a client wants that? So sorry, I'll back up a bit. You said that you work typically with global enterprise level clients who are looking to kind of curate their content over multiple kind of regions, territories, etc. And do you stick to a certain client in a certain industry as well, or is it across industry?
Cross industry, yeah, we've probably developed something of not just a specialism for, but a passion in travel. Partly because, not only is travel booming at the moment, it's a great time to be in travel, but also there's so many opportunities for digital to play a role in the customer journey. There's so many opportunities for personalization. So it just happens to fit really well with what we do, but it is fairly sector agnostic, yeah.
Right. Okay. So if a client wants to work with you, as you say, you have like would you say that you do projects as well as retainers? So this retainer is your therefore care service. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So it's most common that there will be a project. You know, as always, that's kind of like you know, jumps you quite a long way forward. You can get a lot done within the confines of a project. And so that will be a gateway most of the time. That is the gateway to then a longer term relationship. It's within therefore care where I think then the opportunity to really build and sustain that relationship happens. And yeah, we're talking about ways that we can continue to develop that. We've got a really good model now because it's ring fenced in terms of resource. It's quite predictable. And now we can start to think about what other services can we bolt onto that on an ongoing basis that a client's really going to value. But yeah, no, it's projects and retainer, you know, typical kind of agency model is always there. But I think we put a lot of emphasis on the ongoing therefore care piece, because really that is not only the predictable revenue, but also, you know, it's incredibly well managed and, you know, very operationally mature. So it just makes sense to continue to kind of build that.
Okay, so given that you've got the title of CSD, but you're hands-on account managing, principally for those clients who have signed up for the Therefore Care service, do the project managers report into you because you have that senior title, or do they report into head of ops?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We've actually got another guy, David, and he really runs Therefore Care. So actually, the project management office really runs into him, and then he and I work closely together. So it's slightly unique in that fashion, and I sit sort of slightly as an umbrella over that. So I find that quite helpful because I think as a client service director, one of the benefits, one of the luxuries is to be slightly removed from the day-to-day running of projects and even retained work, so that you can build a relationship with clients which is a little bit more personal, and you know, you can sit on their side of the table a little bit more, and you don't have to get quite so ingrained into the detail. And when I speak to kind of senior clients, that's what they want. You know, if there's an issue with the work, well, give me access to the people who are doing the work, because probably I can help. But if it's not that, I just want to have a relationship with you. I want to feel that we can talk about things that aren't just work. And when I need an opinion, you'll have one and it will be aligned to my business because you know me so well.
Right. Okay. So this leads me quite nicely onto your role as CSD there. So what are you doing on a day-to-day basis to kind of retain and grow those relationships?
Yeah, so I kind of see my role as straddling almost two sides of the fence. On the one hand, it's making sure that what we're delivering today is aligned to the client's objectives and the objectives of their business. Obviously, that's important because if we're not doing that, that's just the baseline. However, there's also looking ahead and saying, well, what does this agency need to look like in 18 months' time to still be delivering on those objectives? And so I kind of split my focus between making sure, you know, at a high level that everything that we're doing at the moment is not just going well, i.e. we're delivering on time, we're delivering on budget. It's really speaking to what the client wants, and we're delivering on some objectives. You know, we're meeting some tangible business goal, and we're not just, you know, on time and on budget. That's the baseline. That's what clients expect. I think I heard from you like 3 or 4 years ago that, you know, in order to retain a client, you need to go beyond just what's been asked for and, you know, provide something that they haven't asked for, but you know that they would value and that they need. So, you know, I think the flip side to that is, are we delivering on actual tangible business objectives? And are we doing something that proves to the client that they're front of mind, that we're thinking about them, that we're looking at their industry, that we're trying to stay ahead on their behalf, so that the next difficult meeting that they're going to have internally, you know, they've got something that we've spoken about that they can drop into conversation, and that we're kind of working in partnership together. So it's kind of, you know, partly present day, partly, and I think probably the most exciting part is looking forward to the future and, you know, what do we need to look like in 12 to 18 months time.
And can I assume the fact that you are non-billable makes that easier?
It
Because it
does.
takes the pressure off having to bill against certain jobs. Because what you've just described is kind of nirvana for a lot of account managers, to
Mm.
look up from the weeds and look at where are we now? How can I solve the problems that the client has now, but also where can I lead them in the future? So,
Yes.
so tell me about, because I'm sure a lot of agency owners, particularly listening, I've met agencies that have a non-billable account management team, but
Yeah.
some people think that it's quite unusual. So can you talk to us a bit about how that works?
Yeah, so I guess at the moment it's a little easier in so much as account management is predominantly me within this organisation, and as we grow and as the team grows, then the pressure on account managers to be somewhat billable may grow with it, and that certainly was the case in my previous agency. I was expected to be billable, and that was a struggle because you're right. I think, the moment that you join a call with a client, especially if it is a client who is conscious of budget, and even if they're not, to be honest, just as a baseline, they are aware that they are on the clock. And so, I'm partly there to strategize with them, to directly add value to their business. I'm partly there as a conduit on the agency side, trying to grow and develop more business. So there is that kind of weird conflict of interest I feel that happens in those scenarios. And when you're not billable and you can just join to be almost on their side of the table, that's enormously helpful. It just, there's no barriers there by default. We've certainly found that in the past that, having an account manager there and then knowing that it's billable, you feel that pressure, therefore, to be adding value in every moment. And otherwise, then you actually just get excluded from those meetings. And that's the worst case scenario of being billable account managers. You don't even get invited to be part of the conversation because they know that I don't really need you to be. I want to have this direct conversation about my project or with a developer or designer or anything else. So I think there's enormous benefits for the account management team to be predominantly, at least, non-billable. And, I think if we're doing our jobs right, then the client's seeing value from us and the agency will see value from us because we'll demonstrate that value in terms of existing client growth and retention. So I really do think it works. I just think it takes a leap of faith from an agency owner point of view, to really commit to that. And it doesn't mean that we're not looking for opportunities to be billable. We're consultants at the end of the day. Like, we can absolutely, and we do on a regular basis, add value, and we shouldn't just give that away for free necessarily. But I think being able to pick and choose when it's appropriate is a real benefit.
And also picking and choosing which client you should be kind of helping and working on at any one time, because that's totally fluid as well. So what advice would you give for other people listening to this who perhaps are billable, they are in a senior account management role, and they're looking to do what you're doing, which is being more consultative, looking at the business challenges, but they're frustrated because they keep getting pulled down in the weeds? How do you stay ahead of, knowing all about the client's business and looking at trends and customer insights and stuff like that? How do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you have to carve out time where that client that has growth potential. I guess actually taking a step back, it's knowing what clients have that growth potential to begin with, and knowing where that time, if it is spent, will generate more business for the agency. I think if that's already been done, then I think it's just about carving out the time where that client is your sole focus. And you know that you're giving all of your kind of investment of effort and attention to just that one client. I don't think I've ever found that by doing that, it hasn't come up with something that I wouldn't otherwise have thought of, and be able to take that to the client and for it to be of interest to them. So it's always been beneficial to do it. I think where it gets difficult is probably where the time hasn't been taken to really categorize and classify clients up front and say, we know that this client has the potential to grow, and we won't grow it if all we're doing is just delivering on the things that they're asking for today. We have to take, a look at what's coming, look at their industry, look at their competitors, and be able to bring something to them that's going to expand their thinking.
What's your criteria for identifying a client with growth potential?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I think my thinking on this has evolved somewhat. I think we had a conversation as well about, not looking quite so much at the kind of lagging indicators of what revenue they've put with you in the past, but the leading indicators of, what suggests that they are a good client and there is the potential to grow. So I've created something of a bit of a scoring system, I suppose, for the accounts that we have, that adds up those various different things of, is it a profitable client? It's one thing to get revenue from a client. Obviously, it's a totally different thing for that client to be profitable. So is it a profitable client? Is it culturally aligned? Are we able to work together? Do we get the best out of one another? Are we strategically aligned as well? The CEO of the agency will always have a vision, what the agency is meant to look like in 12 to 18 months. Is the client going to help us to get there is another factor. And then I think actual pipeline as well. And having one of the most useful things to do is to have that cadence of sort of quarterly meetings with a client where they know that it's time well spent, but we're going to take time almost out of the business. Might be half a day, could even be a whole day. It's going to be as useful for them as it is for us, but for the agency, gives you that visibility of what's coming down the pipe, what's most likely to come off. And so, we've got the great luxury, therefore, of having a sort of 9-month pipeline of really good visibility of what's coming, and then being able to kind of work on that over that period. So, I think those kind of quarterly sessions where everyone just takes a step back and has a think about what's coming, that's really useful because it means that classification of growth potential is very real and tangible.
This is all music to my ears. Anyone would have thought you've come on my training course, honestly.
Wish I had.
It's so good because it makes growth so much easier if you can stay close to their business and they see you then as being consultative. I call it working upstream with your clients, because a lot of agencies only work downstream on kind of deliverables, and it's very tactical at that level. How do you keep up with all of your different clients? Because they're not, you're industry agnostic, as you said. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think that can be probably the biggest challenge, and probably most CSDs will say the same thing. As your agency grows, especially if you are sector agnostic, it's very hard to feel like you're adding value as well, because you really want to go deep into one industry, but you're constantly having to dance between them. So I think tools can be very helpful in this regard, because you're constantly trying to maintain this bird's eye view, and you have a finite amount of time at the end of the day that you can apply within a working week. So I find it useful to have tools that will almost give a bit of a kind of red, amber, green system that I can keep a track of. And, where I see that things are at risk, there are issues going on, I can dive into those. Where I see things are going really well and everything's, wonderful and green, then I know that focusing in on those areas are only going to make things, even better. So I think having that kind of bird's eye view and having tools that enable that bird's eye view are very, time well spent to get that right. We, as an agency, we're a kind of Atlassian, Google based agency. And Atlassian tools especially, we use a lot for the actual doing of the work. But we also use it as, useful places for both status updates. So we use Atlassian's Atlas tool, which is a great kind of Twitter length status update with a status of kind of red, amber, green for like at risk through to, everything's going great. I find that enormously helpful because I can just see that on a weekly basis. And if I haven't been able to keep touch with every single item that's going on, it gives me that bird's eye view. But it also keeps the whole agency up to date, which, most people within an agency, especially like ours, which is fully remote, and we have people dotted all around the world, people want to know how the agency's doing. They want to know if it's profitable. They want to know if we've got new clients coming in. They want to know how existing clients are responding to their work. So they can subscribe to those updates as well as me and just see, a cross section of how things are going. So that could be a really good way to kind of keep in touch. And then I think the cross-industry thing is probably the other challenge. I find it, and this obviously needs the buy-in of your agency leadership team. I find it really useful in the same way as personally you may have a mentor, to have some industry people, spotted across kind of the cross section of industries that you focus on, that you can draw insight from. They're totally unbiased because they're just in the industry. They don't have any specific kind of interest in or conflict of interest with any particular client, but they keep a pulse of how that industry is going. I find that enormously helpful. And so I try to pick, a few people within the industry, and, we'll just meet on a monthly basis or even on a quarterly basis. What's going on in your industry right now? What might my client be facing that they haven't told me yet? But you're aware that they're probably facing it because everyone in that industry is. So I think it's being strategic about your time and knowing that you do have a finite amount of time at the end of the day, and you have to kind of zero in where you think you're going to be most valuable.
And do you capture those insights that you gain from all of these kind of mentors in different industries and share them with the rest of the team?
That's right, yeah. So one of the other Atlassian tools that we use is product discovery. And this is kind of a space for ideas. So if we were going to go to our quarterly meeting with a client and talk about what's coming up, we'll put those ideas into that forum. You can kind of roadmap that so a client can visually see, oh, okay, yes, I agree, this is something that we want to focus on in the next 6 months, versus something that's a great idea. We may never get to it, but certainly it's a kind of further down the road thing. And so when I have conversations that align to those ideas and align to that roadmap, they'll go in as insights into that. And then anyone in the team can pick that up and see it. And so I think we'll try to do more of that as we go forward, especially within that realm of therefore care. Continuous discovery is a really interesting topic. A lot of clients would love to have the time to do it, go out and speak to real customers, get their insights on how the service is affecting them. Quite often they don't have the time and the resource to be able to do that, and they may lean on us to be able to do that. So to be able to bring not just, I guess, a kind of industry expert view, but from the ground up, this is how real customers within your industry feel about the products and services that you offer. That's really valuable insight to be able to then bring back to a client and say, we've done this independently, potentially, and this is what we're hearing, and this is how maybe it might shape the next 6 months of your roadmap.
Love that, because clients at the end of the day, they're interested in their business and their customers, and anything that you can bring from in terms of insight, it's hugely valuable. Just going back a step to the tool you're using, the Atlas tool, that I thought that was great as well. So, you're always looking at where am I going to most effectively spend my time? We've talked about categorization of clients to identify growth clients, but then you also said, I look across the projects and look if it's red, amber, green, so I know where I need to focus my energy. Now, presumably the project managers are inputting into whether that's red, amber, green. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So each project manager will obviously have their portfolio of projects, and it's their responsibility to then, I guess, amplify the status update for the wider agency on a weekly basis. So it never feels like you're too far removed from the day-to-day without actually having to be fully engrossed in the day-to-day, where then I think the flip side of that is that you never feel that you have the time to be strategic. So I guess the goal is always to try to engineer time to be strategic without losing touch. At the end of the day, you have to know how those individual projects are going. It's the lifeblood of any agency, and it's what your client is really looking to you for as a baseline, and to be that reliable partner. But to be able to do that without consuming all of your attention, and to be able to still feel that you have the headspace to be strategic. It was always a challenge in the past, and something that I've worked really hard to try and maintain now.
Brilliant. I'm curious, because you're all remote, I think this system sounds very buttoned up. It sounds like it's working well, and it gives you the information you need. Do you also have like Zoom calls with the whole project management team? How often do you all get together as a kind of service delivery team?
For sure. Yeah. So we'll still get together on a weekly basis. So we'll have our weekly management team meeting and kind of project management office meeting, I guess. Likewise with things like resourcing. So at the bare minimum, on a weekly basis, we're always touching base and actually talking about things. I think what those individual status updates do is that they stop us from having a meeting to give the status update, and they become a meeting to talk about what's already been updated. And that's a big change. And I think it enables you to maximize your time. If I already know what the update is, but I don't understand why or how I can help, then we can spend 5 minutes talking about that. That's much time much better spent than 5 minutes just giving the update. You don't really have time to really take it all in and ask questions, and you never really get to the heart of the issue. So.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone listening is probably sat in meetings where everyone's going around the room with an update and you're just saying, I haven't said anything, nothing's relevant to me, and it's a complete waste of my time. So that sounds like a very efficient way of going. So great tip there. Tell me more about, you are obviously attending these quarterly strategy sessions, which is fantastic. That's kind of working upstream, working very strategically, and that's where you want to be seen. What are your other touch points? Like, do the project managers run all of the projects? Do you show your face in project meetings, like whether it's status, and you're talking about the granular detail, or do you not get involved in that at all?
Yeah, no, I do. And I think it's worthwhile doing so. I think when you're non-billable and known to be non-billable, then you can dip in and out. And, from a client's point of view, it's great to see your face. Likewise, they're not having to worry that it's another line item on the bill. I think I try and keep a fairly predictable cadence to it. I think when it's too random, then it's very obvious when you join, because you know that there's a new opportunity that you're going after and suddenly your presence is there.
Or you're coming to the end of a contract. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think making it a predictable cadence is helpful, but I think showing your face and being there, like the flip side of not being too ingrained in the day-to-day. And even if there are tools that will help you to kind of keep in touch and not lose touch of a project, from a client's point of view, nothing beats FaceTime, and whether that's personal, physical FaceTime, or whether it's on screen. A client wants to see that you are really invested in their business and that their business is your number one priority. So yeah, try to stay, it might be a fortnightly basis rather than a weekly basis, or in some cases a monthly basis. But I think it's important to be there and be, noticeably part of the team. Plus the team itself takes confidence from the presence in some cases. Sometimes a humble status update meeting is not a humble status update meeting, and it evolves into something else. So I think, being there and being part of the team and supporting the team is just as important as anything else.
Do you find that at the client side, different people from the client side attend a quarterly strategy session versus the clients that actually are kind of responsible for the day-to-day sort of tactics? Sure. So are they different people always, or are there overlaps sometimes?
Yeah, I think there's definitely overlap. Sometimes they'll be quite segregated. Other time it's the same individual, and you're going to see them throughout. Probably another good reason to be both present in the quarterly meeting and present, at least, on a periodic basis in those individual kind of day-to-day meetings. I think by virtue of it being quarterly, there's an inference that is strategic. And so therefore, more senior people tend to gravitate towards those meetings because they haven't necessarily had the time to keep up with the day-to-day, month by month, and it's really useful update for them as well. But likewise, the people who are actually running the project, who are involved day-to-day, are hugely influential within any organisation. And so, to not pay attention to those areas and only focus on, the kind of senior leadership level, leaves you very vulnerable, I think, as an agency. So I think you have to split your focus between the two.
I've got so many more questions, but I'm just conscious of time and I want to squeeze so many in. We talked briefly about AI, and obviously I've got a webinar coming up in a couple of weeks about some use cases that I think can make an account manager's job a little bit easier. But talk to me about how you're using it in your agency.
Yeah, so AI has been a topic now for a good few years and a keen interest of our CEO. So he's really pushed the agenda on it. I think there's some areas where it's quite a mature part of the process. So, developers will use things like Copilot, which is almost like an autocomplete for developers in my mind, to assist them and to make sure that it's adhering to best practice and that sort of thing. So I think things like that are already very ingrained, and it's making us more efficient, and obviously clients benefit from that efficiency. I think from an account management point of view, my current use of it is largely in, again, kind of extending my time, I suppose, from a research perspective, being able to prepare for meetings and to have, to feel like I've got a good wealth of kind of industry knowledge. Using ChatGPT as an example is a great way to cut through a lot of that. And, I'm always very aware that I'm getting a one-to-one answer, and there's nuance and there's, other things to find out, but it can be enormously helpful there. Enormously helpful also in making sense of and organizing ideas. Sometimes you can feel quite chaotic, and you're constantly writing messages and emails as part of your day-to-day. Having a little bit of assistance is quite nice, and kind of streamlining that process is really good. And we also use tools, like I generally, if I'm in a meeting, I have a tool called Tactic, which is kind of a browser plugin that will record notes of a meeting. And there's a kind of one-click, summarize this meeting. It's amazing. I'm always quite amused by the fact that when you watch it transcribe, it gets it so wrong in a hilarious way. But then when you hit summarize, it does it perfectly. It's amazing. I don't know how it does it, but it seems to work very well. So I think, there's an awful lot of time-saving techniques that AI is so helpful for. And I think now we're starting to work out how we can not just pass on our own efficiencies to clients, but also how can we add value. I talked earlier about the fact that the problem we're commonly solving is this ever-growing amount of content that the marketing team, sales team, various teams within an enterprise organization are having to keep on top of. That naturally leads to content governance, and how do I know what content is old and in need of refreshing? How do I know what content maybe doesn't meet a set of standards that the organization has set? Again, it's that kind of bird's eye view. I need to be able to kind of rush to the problem at hand and know where it exists. And so we're starting to use AI in kind of content governance models to try and make clients feel that they can use their time more effectively.
Can you share with us what tool you're using in that instance?
Yeah, it's generally still OpenAI based. We're huge advocates for open source technology, so we're really building small tools here and there. But there are lots of platforms out there that are using AI in really interesting ways. I sat in on a Twilio segment webinar the other day, which was like a customer data platform. And they showed an example in a kind of live chat environment whereby AI could generate a response, and the response would feel like it was written in natural language and it was very human, but it wasn't contextualized, and so it very quickly became very generic. Whereas by plugging in this customer data platform, now it could feed that AI information specific to the person, and therefore the AI could respond with a message that was actually really personalized and now felt not just more human, but also actually added value and became useful to the customer. So in some cases it's building things of our own, and in some cases it's recognizing that there are great tools out there already and just finding the right way to integrate them.
I think you're absolutely right. I think we're at this point at the moment. I mean, it's just moving so quickly, but the likes of Salesforce, HubSpot, et cetera, are all integrating AI tools now and this predictive way of working. So I think, I think what I'm seeing, and also what I'm talking to agencies about, is looking at your current tech stack. What are you currently using? Because inevitably they're just going to be AI driven. At the moment, there's this proliferation of different tools you could use for all these different things, but it makes sense if you're using Google Workspace, you're using Microsoft Teams, that's going to incorporate everything anyway. And I suppose you know, by the time you've paid all these monthly fees for all these tools, it can get quite expensive as well. But that's really, really interesting. Any tips for any prompts that you're using with
Mm.
ChatGPT for your research purposes?
Oh, interesting. I'm probably still learning in this space, I
We
think.
all are, Luke. We all are. Yeah.
Sure. I think to be honest, it's just interesting to reframe as you give it a prompt and you get a response. I think the prompts that then start to become really useful are just a natural consequence of going back over and back over and back over. Reframe this, add in this. What about this? Can you base it on this framework or this recognized piece of knowledge? I think that's where you get a really useful response. And I think I've certainly used it for research before and come up with information that hasn't been quite right. And I've gone to my client and I said, well, I've done a bit of research and this is what I've found out. And they said, well, actually, no, my experience is this. And, it hasn't never been a point of contention that I've brought that knowledge to them, even if it hasn't been quite accurate. But it's been a useful conversation starter, and they've been able to then layer on detail and nuance that I wouldn't otherwise had. So, I think it could be a really great conversation starter as well. And you just come out of the meeting feeling like you have more than just general knowledge, but very specific knowledge that's contextual to that client.
I love that. I mean, old school account management 30 years ago, Luke, we used to have to read industry press, all of these. We used to have the press clippings book where you'd had to kind of gem up before a client meeting. Nowadays, we've got it all at our fingertips. And as you say, it makes you feel more confident. You look more prepared. You look more professional. You look like you care and you give a damn about what's going on. And this is now minutes rather than hours. So I love that. And you're right, when you're doing the prompting, the more kind of nuanced you can get along the same thread, the more rich the data is going to be. So that's great. What are your clients asking you about AI?
Yes.
Any conversations you've had with clients you can share?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think where it's most obviously useful, and I think some technology vendors have done this really well. I can think of Shopify as an example, and their kind of Shopify Magic tool. It's the activities that a client spends a lot of time doing or requires a lot of resource to do that they wish they could use elsewhere, and they can't because it's just so time consuming. So Shopify Magic creates like product descriptions at almost the click of a button. And that's something I've worked for a kind of multi-brand sports retailer before. That was a whole 2 or 3 people's role, was to sit there and take in the product and write product descriptions. And it's hard. It's really difficult. You've got to make each one slightly different. You've got to make each one, adhere to a certain brand and tone of voice. And it's got to be accurate at the same time. So I think any examples like that where it can be time saving, that's probably the most obvious. I think what may come more now is not just saving time, but generating opportunity. And we at the same time we're having lots of conversations internally about the legalities of OpenAI and the use of AI, because obviously each country has its own take on this. Canada certainly has its own take on this. And, very aware that I don't think at the moment our creative team is necessarily using AI to generate imagery, but many agencies are. And it's useful to know, where does the IP sit in those sorts of scenarios. So I think, they want to take advantage of it. They want to save time through it, but they also don't want to expose themselves to more risk. And they want to be educated in how do I make use of this in a way that's going to add value to my business, not put me at risk of taking value away later. So we're trying to keep on touch of that, on top of that as well, and pass on anything we learn to them. And in most cases, they have their own legal counsel as well, so we can just have a collaborative conversation. So we've heard this, potentially that poses a bit of a risk. How do you feel about that? And have a dialogue around it.
I think it's really important to have a dialogue at this stage while the legalities and the rules are being formulated. There is actually, just FYI, you probably know this already, but the Marketing AI Institute, who have a fantastic podcast and also a free webinar about the overview of AI every month, and it's live. They have on their site an AI policy document that you can adapt for your business. And I think what I'm seeing amongst other agencies, they're starting to formulate a bit of an AI policy for clients, because this is a topic of conversation, particularly coming up with procurement. And I think you touched on it before, saying, you know, ultimately we want to be able to pass on these savings that we are being more efficient to our clients. And I suppose it leads me on to a question around the future. Like, do you have any thoughts for where the agency industry is going? Who's going to be most successful in moving forward in the next kind of 5 years at least?
Yeah, I think certainly we as an agency are, obviously we're very technology driven. It's really, the large part of what we sell, I guess. And we're definitely seeing that. I think the advances in technology over the last even 2 years are really challenging the status quo of how we might have developed digital experiences 2 years ago versus today. So I think maybe this is an easy answer, but I think the agency that continues to evolve and question the technologies that they're using and use them in different ways, definitely more likely to succeed than others. And I think in that technology space, that is a problem, because there are many agencies who might specialize in one type of content management system, as an example. And you can develop deep expertise in that, and that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think things move so quickly that obviously there is also risk in going, just pigeonholed into one technology over another. So I think just having a willingness to be open to change, I suppose, and not get too precious about what happens today and how it happens today, but be willing to kind of reflect and evolve and change things and experiment more than anything else.
I think that's really great advice, Luke. And so that's really for agency owners and agencies in general. Any specific parting words of advice for account managers? Like you've mentioned having mentors in different industries. I thought that was a great tip. Any other pieces of advice you can share with those in account management who are on that pathway, perhaps CSD, perhaps agency owner, to keep evolving themselves?
Yeah, I think it starts with a baseline of just passion for the industry that you're in, and that doesn't change. That hopefully only deepens as new technology comes along. So I think having a passion and continuing to kind of evolve that passion is a key thing. I guess as a client service person, definitely have to invest time in your own skills. And I think what you do for account managers is enormously helpful. When I started out in account management, like I said, I really fell into it. Likewise, project management became just a need that kind of sprung up organically. I hadn't been trained in it, so again, getting training in that really helped. I think you mentioned in the previous podcast about Marcus and the impact he had on your career. I think there's a point in account management where if you didn't start from a sales or strategic point, you started from a creative point. It certainly took me a long time to realize that I was in any kind of sales. It just wasn't on my radar that that's kind of the profession that I was in. And so the basics of good negotiation and everything else I really didn't have. So yeah, I think if you can encourage your agency owner to put you on training, absolutely do it. If you have the luxury of being able to put yourself on training, if you don't have the backing of the agency, it's worthwhile doing it. I appreciate that everyone has that luxury. And I think finding mentors, is absolutely a major thing. It's probably 3 or 4 people in my career who I still speak to. Try to make a point of speaking to them every month if I can. To be honest, since I've come here, because it was such a big move from the UK to Toronto, very deliberately picked 1 or 2 of those mentors, and I speak to them every week because it just gives me that confidence. You know, I can take specific issues to them. This is what I dealt with this week. This is how I dealt with it. Is there, you know, do you see any gaps? Is there anything else I could be doing? You know, no way I would feel as confident about my role today if it wasn't for those relationships. So I think that, if there was one thing to do, it would be, if possible, try and find that mentor for you that can not just give you confidence, but actually, you know, help you to learn and grow as well.
I think that's a great piece of advice. Like, so much there that you've said that which resonates, and having also the courage to ask for that feedback, to share with them what you did, and then get that feedback. I think that speaks volumes about your character as well. So, and it's obviously, you're obviously doing well through it, because you've managed to, travel with your job,
Yeah.
get more senior positions. So fantastic, Luke. This has been brilliant. If someone wants to talk to you about what you do in the agency and what the agency does, because it sounds very compelling, what's the best way that they can reach you?
Yeah, I'd say LinkedIn. I probably use LinkedIn more than any other social channel. I find it a really great source of community and knowledge. So yeah, LinkedIn would be a good place.
All right, we'll put a link to your profile in the show notes. Luke, thank you so much for your time. The time is just, I knew it was going to happen, whizzed away. So thank you again.
No, thank you so much, Jenny.